When you watched Friends, you were watching 6 of the most famous people in the world play characters dealing with real human problems. But what you didn't know was that the actors themselves were dealing with problems just as real, just as serious, and in many cases, much darker than anything that happened on the show. The Friends cast battled addiction, depression, anxiety, perfectionism, and a whole range of mental health struggles while maintaining the image of being happy, successful, and having it all figured out. The tragedy and the beauty of their stories is that most of them went through these struggles silently, without the world knowing, without the support systems that people need to heal. But over time, each of them opened up about what they were going through. And their stories are not just heartbreaking, they're inspiring. They show us that mental health struggles don't discriminate. They affect the most famous, the most successful, the most talented people in the world. And they show us that recovery is possible. In this video, we're uncovering the dark truth about the mental health battles and addiction struggles that the Friends cast faced behind closed doors. And we're doing this not to exploit them or to make their suffering into entertainment. We're doing this because their stories matter. Their stories help people. Their stories show us that we're not alone in what we're struggling with. So let's get into it. Let's start with Matthew Perry, because his story is the one that most people know about, but probably not the full extent of it. Matthew Perry battled serious addiction to alcohol and prescription drugs for years. And here's the thing that's important to understand. This wasn't a choice. This wasn't him being weak or irresponsible. Addiction is a disease, and Matthew was dealing with a disease while playing one of the main characters on the biggest show on television. He was showing up to work every single day, dealing with depression, dealing with addiction, dealing with the pressure of being on the biggest show on television, and he was still delivering his lines perfectly. He was still making people laugh. He was still showing up as Chandler Bing. But behind the scenes, he was struggling. There were times when his addiction affected his work. There were times when he missed days. There were times when people didn't understand what was happening because addiction is still stigmatized, still misunderstood, and people didn't know how to support him. What makes Matthew's story particularly tragic is that he came very close to dying multiple times from his addiction. He's talked about how he overdosed, how he had near-death experiences, how there were moments where he genuinely believed he might not make it. And through all of that, he was trying to maintain his public image. He was trying to keep his job. He was trying to be the person that people expected him to be. It's almost unimaginable the kind of strength and resilience that would require. Matthew went through many years of recovery attempts, rehabilitation, relapse, recovery again, relapse again. Addiction is not a linear journey. It's a cycle that's incredibly difficult to break. But Matthew eventually found recovery. He's been open about his sobriety journey. He's been an advocate for addiction recovery. And as of 2024, Matthew is sober, and he's using his platform to help other people who are struggling with addiction. His story shows us that recovery is possible, but it takes time, it takes support, and it takes incredible strength. Jennifer Aniston's mental health struggles were different from Matthew's, but they were just as real. Jennifer battled serious anxiety and perfectionism. And here's something that people don't really talk about. Jennifer Aniston became the biggest star on the biggest show in the world at a time when media culture was incredibly toxic and obsessed with celebrity. Paparazzi followed her everywhere. Magazines dissected her appearance. People had opinions about everything she did. And Jennifer, as a person, struggled with the pressure of that. She struggled with anxiety about being perfect, about living up to people's expectations, about the media obsession with her life and her body and her appearance. She's talked in interviews about how difficult that time was. She talked about how she was dealing with perfectionism on set, needing everything to be exactly right, being anxious about her performance, being anxious about how she looked, being anxious about what people thought about her. The anxiety that Jennifer dealt with was exacerbated by the media's obsession with her. Every breakup was a news story. Every weight fluctuation was discussed. Every romantic relationship was analyzed, and she was dealing with that level of scrutiny while also trying to be a human being, trying to have relationships, trying to have a private life. Eventually, Jennifer sought therapy, which she's been open about, and therapy helped her manage the anxiety. It helped her understand where the perfectionism was was coming from. It helped her develop coping strategies. Jennifer's story shows us that even when you have everything that society says you should want, you can still struggle with anxiety and mental health challenges. And it shows us that seeking help, going to therapy, talking about it is the path to healing. Courteney Cox dealt with panic disorder and anxiety during the height of Friends' popularity. Courteney has talked about how she was struggling with anxiety on set. She was dealing with panic attacks. She was dealing with the pressure of being on a hit show. And the way she coped with it was by isolating herself. She would retreat. She wouldn't reach out to people. She would deal with it internally. And that isolation made things worse. Panic disorder is terrifying. It's a condition where you have sudden, intense panic attacks that feel like you're having a heart attack or dying, but you're not. Your brain is essentially malfunctioning in a way that makes you feel like you're in mortal danger when you're actually safe. Courteney dealt with that while maintaining her professional image, while working long hours, while being in the spotlight. What's beautiful about Courteney's journey is that she eventually reached out for help. She went to therapy. She learned coping strategies for her anxiety and panic disorder. She learned to manage her symptoms. And instead of continuing to isolate herself, she opened up about it. She talked publicly about her struggles. And that vulnerability helped not just her, but other people who were listening to her story and thinking, I struggle with panic disorder too. I'm not alone. Courteney's story shows us that reaching out, asking for help, connecting with others is the path out of isolation and toward healing. Lisa Kudrow's mental health struggles were more philosophical in nature. Lisa studied philosophy in college. She's intellectually curious. She thinks deeply about life and meaning and existence. And that depth of thinking, while it's beautiful and valuable, can also lead to existential anxiety. Lisa has talked about how she struggled with existential questions, with overthinking, with anxiety about the meaning of life and her place in the world. And she found a coping mechanism in comedy. Comedy became a way for her to process her anxiety, to make sense of the world, to connect with people. Lisa's journey also involved spiritual practices. She's talked about meditation, about yoga, about developing practices that help her manage the existential anxiety and stay grounded in the present moment instead of getting lost in overthinking. What's interesting about Lisa's story is that it shows us that mental health struggles come in many forms. Not everyone is dealing with clinical depression or substance abuse. Some people are dealing with existential anxiety, with the burden of thinking too deeply, with the struggle to find meaning in life. And those struggles are just as real and just as valid. Lisa's approach to managing her anxiety through spiritual practices and mindfulness shows us that there are many paths to wellness, many ways to manage mental health challenges. David Schwimmer's mental health journey involves depression and perfectionism. David is a serious actor. He takes his craft incredibly seriously. He approaches everything with depth and intensity. And that intensity, while it made him a better actor, also meant that he was constantly pushing himself, constantly holding himself to impossible standards, constantly critical of himself. David has talked about struggling with depression during the Friends era. He's talked about how his serious nature, his perfectionism, his method acting approach all contributed to his mental health struggles. Depression is different from sadness. Depression is a medical condition where your brain chemistry is imbalanced and you lose the ability to feel joy or motivation. It's paralyzing. It's all-consuming, and David dealt with that while trying to maintain his professional image and deliver a great performance every single day. What helped David manage his depression was finding outlets. He found directing as an outlet. Directing allowed him to process his emotions through his work. Directing allowed him to channel his intensity and perfectionism into something creative and meaningful. David has also been an activist, using his platform to speak about social justice issues. And activism became another outlet, another way to process his emotions and make a difference in the world. David's story shows us that sometimes managing mental health challenges involves finding healthy outlets, finding ways to channel our struggles into something meaningful and constructive. Matt LeBlanc's mental health struggles were less publicized than some of the others, but they're no less real. Matt dealt with loneliness and relationship issues. And here's something that people don't always understand about fame. Fame doesn't prevent loneliness. In fact, sometimes fame exacerbates loneliness. You're surrounded by people, but you can't form genuine connections because people want a piece of you. People want access to your fame. People want to be around you for the wrong reasons. And Matt struggled with that. He struggled with the confusion of his career post friends. He wasn't sure what his next move should be. He was struggling with relationship issues. He was dealing with the pressure of being the guy who played Joey, with all the expectations that came with that. Matt's journey involved accepting his limitations, accepting that he couldn't control everything in his life, and finding peace in the relationships that were genuine. It involved stepping away from some of the pressure and expectation and finding what made him happy as opposed to what made him famous. Matt's story shows us that success doesn't automatically lead to happiness. Sometimes you need to step back and reassess what you actually want from life as opposed to what the world expects from you. Now, what's important to understand about all of these stories is that these are not stories of weakness. These are not stories of people who didn't have what it takes. These are stories of people who were dealing with real medical and psychological challenges while living under conditions that made those challenges worse. Fame puts pressure on you. Wealth can sometimes isolate you. When you have everything materially, it can be confusing when you're still struggling emotionally and psychologically. The Friends cast members had therapists and resources that many people don't have access to. But they also had pressure and scrutiny that most people will never experience. What their stories show us is that mental health struggles are universal. They affect rich people and poor people. They affect famous people and non-famous people. They affect successful people and struggling people. Mental health doesn't discriminate. And the path out of mental health struggles is through awareness, through reaching out for help, through therapy, through building support systems, through finding healthy coping mechanisms, and through being willing to talk about it. One of the most important things that the Friends cast has done is normalize talking about mental health struggles. Matthew Perry's openness about his addiction has helped countless people who are struggling with addiction. Jennifer Aniston's openness about her anxiety has helped people who are struggling with anxiety. Courtney's openness about her panic disorder has helped people who are struggling with panic. Lisa's openness about existential anxiety has helped people who overthink. David's openness about depression has helped people who are struggling with depression, and Matt's openness about loneliness has helped people who feel isolated. The fact that these incredibly successful, incredibly talented, incredibly famous people struggled with mental health issues shows us something important. It shows us that success doesn't cure mental illness. It shows us that talent doesn't protect you from depression. It shows us that fame doesn't mean you have it all figured out. And most importantly, it shows us that talking about it, seeking help, being vulnerable is strength, not weakness. What's also important to understand is that recovery from mental health struggles is not linear. It's not like you go to therapy once and you're fixed. It's an ongoing process. The Friends cast members continue to work on their mental health. They continue to go to therapy. They continue to practice the coping strategies they've learned. Recovery is a journey, not a destination. And that's something that people need to understand about mental health. It's not something you cure and then you're done. It's something you manage, you work on, you continue to develop strategies for throughout your life. The Friends cast's willingness to talk about their struggles has also helped break down the stigma around mental health. There's still so much shame around mental health struggles. People still feel like they should be able to handle everything on their own. People still feel like asking for help is weakness. But the Friends cast showing their vulnerability, showing that they needed help, showing that they struggled, has helped normalize the idea that asking for help is actually strength. That vulnerability is actually power. That talking about your struggles is the path to healing. As of 2024, the Friends cast is in a much better place mentally and emotionally than they were during the height of the show's run. Matthew is in recovery and using his platform to help others. Jennifer has built a life that works for her and manages her anxiety. Courtney has healed from her panic disorder and is thriving. Lisa continues to practice her spiritual and mindfulness practices. David uses his directing and activism as outlets, and Matt has found peace in his private life. Their journeys show us that recovery is possible, that healing is possible, that you can struggle with serious mental health challenges and still go on to build a meaningful, fulfilling life. The message that their stories send is this: if you're struggling with mental health challenges, you're not alone. If you're dealing with addiction, depression, anxiety, perfectionism, or any other mental health struggle, there are people who understand what you're going through. There are paths to recovery. There is healing available to you. And the first step is reaching out, asking for help, being willing to be vulnerable and honest about what you're struggling with. The Friends cast did that, and their lives are better because of it. Your life can be better too. Subscribe to CelebTruth for more deep dives into celebrity lives, mental health awareness content, inspiring stories of recovery and resilience, and the real truth about the people we think we know. In our next video, we're revealing the most shocking financial decisions the Friends cast made that cost them millions. And trust me, some of these decisions are absolutely wild. Thanks for watching CelebTruth. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health challenges, please reach out for help. There are resources available. There are people who care and who want to support you. You don't have to struggle alone. Drop a comment below and let us know if this video resonated with you. Have you struggled with mental health challenges? How did you find your path to healing? Let's create a supportive community where we can talk openly about mental health without shame or judgment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.